Xi Jinping's opening address at the 19th CPC National Congress placed a great emphasis on agriculture and rural areas. Can technological innovations ensure food security in China and abroad? Meanwhile, what kind of rural China are we going to see in the future? We'll be back after this. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing Monday to Friday on CGTN. China has pledged to extend the land use contracts for farmers for another 30 years. Chinese President Xi Jinping laid out a policy blueprint for agriculture and rural area development in his party work report 2 weeks ago. With only 10% of the world's arable land, China produces food for 20% of the world's population. It deems agriculture key to the stability of the country and the well-being of its people. In recent years, China has applied more technological innovations in agriculture to maintain sustainable growth. So what are the achievements and the challenges in the agricultural development and food security? And what kind of rural China are we going to see in the near future? For more on agricultural innovation and China's future in the rural areas, we are joined in our studio by two guests. Shi Yan, who is the Executive Director of Shared Harvest CSA Farm in Beijing. CSA stands for Community Support Agriculture. Welcome to our program. Joining us also in Beijing, Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Joining us in Indiana, the United States, Holly Wang, Agricultural Economic Professor at Purdue University, who's also with the Qianren Global Expert Program of China Academy of Agricultural Sciences. Mainly that is a program soliciting talents, Chinese talents from all over the world, helping China to develop agricultural policies. Welcome. So, to you, may I ask you, Shi, what does all of the new goals and purposes illustrated by the 19th Party Congress report mean to a community supporting agriculture expert like you?
I think this report really focused on a new strategy.
What is it?
It's Rural Regeneration National Strategy. I think that means
rural rejuvenation.
Regeneration.
Regeneration.
Yeah.
Explain, please.
So it's not means just focus on agriculture industry, but also focus on people who live in the rural and also the culture of agriculture.
What exactly is the culture of agriculture that you're referring to?
Like people who live in the rural and who their way of life, how they they're in the village, what kind of institution in the village is not different. It's not the same with the city. So there are a lot of different cultures in the rural village. We don't need to cover the culture with the culture of city.
You mean we don't need to replace that culture with the culture of city? Seems that you've been working in rural areas for long, not practicing your English much. But we have Ms. Shi. Actually, she is a doctor in agricultural development, doctor degree, and also she's been working in rural areas for more than a decade, trying to do her own experiments. So her voice needs to be heard. But what about you, Ms. Wang from Purdue University? You've been doing research in an academic way about China's agriculture development. Do you agree with what Ms. Shi just suggested?
Yes, I do, but I take a different angle. I look at the production, efficiency, productivity, and actual market demand. So I focus more on agricultural production and supply instead of rural development. And I think this 19th CPC set the tone that we will further improve the efficiency and the productivity. It actually says 3 very good proposals, strategic proposals, like opening up the supply side of the reform and applying high technology such as big data and internet to agriculture, and also furthermore reform the factor markets, including labor, land, and capital. And each of these 3 will have great implication to the Chinese agricultural productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness. Like, for example, what is the major problem that confines Chinese agricultural productivity? It is the scale. It is the land structure, actually. So as you said earlier, that this another 30 years of extension of the contractual system. Actually, it's a good news. It's good news. It gives the investors and farmers the sense of ownership, even though it's not ownership yet. So that's good. Another thing is...
We wait for another time for another thing. We'll let the other speakers also talk about their thing as well. Professor Liu, you could tell already quite clearly, these two ladies have very different views. One is talking about the scale and the modernization of the agricultural production here in China. The other is talking about, well, in rural China, they're just a different culture. You need to respect it and make sure there's a breathing ground for those rural and farmer workers there. So, Professor Liu, what about where you stand? Help us understand.
Well, I grew up in the countryside, and I just hate the existing culture over there because, you know, that's why so many, nearly 300 million people migrate into the cities. So they are not really content, number one, with the small farm or under the household responsibility system. Number two is that the countryside is no longer as beautiful as people might imagine. Everywhere there's pesticide, chemicals, etc. So if we do want a culture, we need to rejuvenate this culture instead of you know, to stay at the status quo. So I totally agree with the lady on the other side. Is that productivity, quality are the mainstay. So in order to do that, we need to have institutional reform, to have, you know, skill operation, and the other is to have better quality control in an organized way.
Okay, we're going to ask you as to how that could be done with what kinds of building and institutional establishments. But now let me go to you. Ms. Shi, you are a lone fighter, it seems, in this discussion, because I will be neutral. So help us to understand why you stand so firm from your own perspective. I hope it's not just because your farm that you're running. I guess it's not just because of that, but rather more than that. What is it?
Because nowadays our urbanization rate is about 50%. In the future, our goal is about 80% of the urbanization, but we still have 20% of Chinese population living in the rural. So we, in a long term, we still a small scale farmers kind of style. So we can't copy, you know, we can't copy the model of United States or Australia, because they have a different background of history, how the farmers become a farmer in their states. But in China, we are indigenous farmers state. Our farms, our farmers, we can't really, you know, become 1,000 acres of land of farms.
What kind of small scale are you talking about when you are saying small scale?
It means family farms.
Family farm, like of how big usually? What is the average?
In the past, every farmer has about 1.3 mu of land, one farmer. But in the future, I think a appropriate scale of family farm probably would be 50 mu.
Yeah, but
it's still a small farm.
But you heard from Holly that, you know, first of all, people can't make money out of that unless they got big supply from the government for subsidies. But that, you know, is not going to last for long term, right? And secondly, there are problems, social problems, environmental problems in the rural areas. Why do you insist that those farmers have to stay where they are while you and your other friends could celebrate urban life? Even though you choose to have a rural life, but you are doing social experiments. You cannot compare your life to all 20% of the farmers that are still remain on their land.
I think
what is the argument?
How farmers can make money. If you compare with the United States or European countries, you could say actually the farmers who earn their money is not only depending on selling their agricultural products. Actually, those developed countries, they give their farmers a lot of subsidy to become a farmer.
You just said you cannot copy the United States and Australia's model, right? So, and you are suggesting we are copying those models.
So our modernization, to my opinion, is to how we can reorganize the farmers as a cooperative.
I'll let the experts to go with your discussion. Professor Liu, briefly.
Well, I think right now, if you look at the current status of the villages, which I frequently visit because my hometown is still there, and they are who are left over there, the main workforce are gone. It's not a rare phenomenon.
Yeah.
So they would rather work 10 hours in the assembly line than doing on a farm. So the Chinese agriculture is no longer a small child sitting on the back of the cow and blowing the flue.
Not that romantic as you see in the watercolor painting.
Exactly. So right now, without the right organization, without the combination of technology and capital, without mechanization, you can hardly move forward. So right now, China, particularly for China, we do need mechanization and modernization in a way because we have almost 20% of the whole world population, but we only have 7% of the world arable land.
According to the Agriculture Ministry, the income of Chinese farmers has grown by nearly, 50% over the past 5 years, with 7 million people returning to the countryside, 7 million only to start new businesses. I want to go back to you, Ms. Wang, in Purdue University. What do all of this say to you? There are so many things that we need to deal with when we talk about rural China. There is the environmental issue, there is a social issue, left behind children, migrant workers, arable land, many of those issues. There's also the issue of what kinds of production model you want to have. That probably is the one that we've been debating of. And meanwhile, there is the issue of what kind of lifestyle do people genuinely want and want to have for their own choice. All of this mixed up together with anti-poverty and some of the other big goals that China has set for itself make things ever more complicated. Professor Wang in Purdue, what do you think should be the priority, and where is the spring to link all of these things together?
There are three aspects in rural and agriculture. We're talking about that, the farmers and the rural society and agriculture. So first, in the agriculture, we're looking at modern agriculture. And you mentioned that there's 7 million people coming back with perhaps investment money as well. So these are different people than the traditional one who lives in the rural areas. These are the younger ones with the education, with the high skills, and more open to the new technologies. So they are the hope to really build a modern agriculture and using all these new technologies. And on the other hand, our other speakers talk about the 80% goal of urbanization. So many of the current rural residents will be no longer farmers in the long run, and those who remain there perhaps can also taking advantage of their small skills and taking advantage of the new technology to develop into the entire value chain of agriculture. Agriculture doesn't only mean cropping from the field or livestock husbandry. It now already covers the secondary industry, food processing, and food manufacturing, and tertiary that use the internet for retail. So these provide some small farmers some chance of making a nice life and income.
Okay. Ms. Shi, it seems that what the other two guests are saying totally going against what you are doing. You are promoting small farms, let's work together, let's bring in this better produce to the urban market, but you are only accounting for a very small part of China's agricultural development. And people cannot expect you and your friends to be able to feed the 1.4 billion that is living in this country. What would you say?
Actually, to my understanding and knowledge, to the FAO statistics, there are nowadays in all the world and also in China, our food are still supplied by 70% of the small farmers. Actually, it's not the biggest or big scale farmers are supplying our food. So I still believe if we really guarantee our food security, we have to guarantee we have farmers who growing food, not only big industrialized farms.
Right. Okay. On the other hand, Professor Liu, you see technologies, innovation, very much the idea these days. It really helped to bring up the production. It helped China to feed itself. Yuan Longping's technology has been such one applauded all over the world. So how much will those be really done? Let's just say, promote to those farmers that Ms. Shi has been talking about. That's a big question mark, not just to the big farms.
Well, I think Ms. Shi is talking about, post-modernization way of life. And right now, our objective is to modernize Chinese agriculture. Yes, in some suburban area like her farm, you can do so for the middle class or for the yuppies, but not for the entire rural area. So Deng Xiaoping's reform motivated people to work very hard because they have the stronger sense of ownership. It's no longer the collective communes. But the limitation of the household responsibility is getting very obvious because, with a small piece of a cottage industry, you cannot do it, on scale, on productivity, etc. So we have to make a clear line between, food crop and cash crop. So for cash crop, smaller operation is doable. But for big food crop like corn, like sorghum and maize or rice, we have to do it on large scale by the combination of technology, of capital, and also information.
All right. I could tell none of you actually persuaded the other parties at this point in our discussion. That creates a necessity for us to debate it even further because the goals are being set. And yet the action plans are still to be initiated at this point. It's very important to have debates like this to make clear what our mind is really on the real thing. Thank you so much for the three of you for being with us. Shi Yan, Liu Baocheng, and Holly Wang. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us. World Insight CGTN in your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Find us also on Twitter, Facebook, and Xin Weibo here in China. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.